Hello everyone, today we will discuss hind brain. So the hind brain contains three parts: cerebellum, pons varoli, medulla oblongata. Cerebellum, pons varoli, medulla oblongata. So previous class we will discuss cerebellum. Next in this class we will discuss second one, pons varoli. Pons varoli. Second one, the hind brain contains three regions: cerebellum, pons varoli, hind brain. Cerebellum, pons varoli, medulla oblongata. So these are the cerebellum. So these are the pons varoli. These are the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. First of all, second side heading pons varoli. So the pons varoli, it is presenting in front of the cerebellum. It is present in the front of the cerebellum, below the midbrain, and above the medulla oblongata. So they are the pons varoli. So this pons varoli below the midbrain. So these are the midbrain. So they are presenting on the below the midbrain, front of the cerebellum, above the medulla oblongata. Next one, it contains nerve fibers. The pons varoli contains nerve fibers. So it contains nerve fibers. The nerve fibers, they formation of bridge. Formation of bridge between two cerebellar hemispheres. The formation of bridge between the two cerebellar hemispheres. So the pons varoli contains nerve fibers. The nerve fibers, they formation of bridge between the two cerebellar hemispheres. Next one, so it contains. So it is also called as relay station. Relay. It is also called as relay station. So it is also called as relay station between the cerebellum and medulla. Relay station between the cerebellum and medulla. Relay station means, so they are the receiving the impulse and sending the impulse. So these are called as a relay station. So they are the pons varoli. So the pons varoli, the receiving from the cerebellum and sending the medulla oblongata. So they are called as relay station. These are the relay station. Next one, it is the rest of the brain. It is the rest of the brain. Next one, the pons varoli contains a pneumotoxic center. It contains pneumotoxic center. So the pons varoli contains a pneumotoxic center. So the pneumotoxic center function, it regulation of the respiratory muscle movements. Regulation of respiratory muscle movements. Respiration of regulatory muscle movements. Regulation of respiratory muscle movements. So it contains a pneumotoxic center. Pneumotoxic center functioning is a regulation of respiratory muscle movements. So the increasing of the respiration process and decreasing of the respiration process. Inhalation of the air, exhalation of air. They are controlling of the respiration. So the respiration process is controlled by the pneumotoxic center. So the pneumotoxic center is presenting on the pons varoli. Pneumotoxic center presenting on the pons varoli. So they are the pons varoli. Once revised. So the pons varoli is presenting on the front of the cerebellum. Front of the cerebellum. So they are the cerebellum. So they are the front of the cerebellum. Below the midbrain. Below the midbrain. Above the medulla oblongata. Above the medulla oblongata. Next one, it contains a nerve fibers. It contains a nerve fibers. So the nerve fibers, they formation of bridge. Nerve fibers, they formation of bridge between the two cerebellar hemispheres. The bridge formation two cerebellar hemispheres. Next one, the pons varoli is called as relay station. Pons varoli is also called as relay station. So the relay station means, so it is a receiving and sending. Receiving and sending. So they are called as a relay station. Next one, the pons varoli contain a pneumotoxic center. Pons varoli contain a pneumotoxic center. So the pneumotoxic center, its functioning is regulation of respiratory muscle movements. Regulation of respiratory muscle movements. So they are the increasing and decreasing of respiration process. So these are the pons varoli. Next, third one, medulla oblongata. Third one, medulla oblongata. Next one, medulla oblongata. Third one, medulla oblongata. Third one, medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. Third one, medulla oblongata. So the medulla oblongata, it is presenting on the posterior part of the brain. It is a posterior part of the brain. Part of the brain. It is the posterior part of the brain. So it is the posterior part of the brain. Next one, it is presenting in the, it is extend from the pons varoli. It is extend from the, it extend from the pons varoli above. It below extends from the, below extends from the spinal cord. Extend from the spinal cord. Extend from the spinal cord. So it is the medulla oblongata, the extend from the pons varoli, and the medulla oblongata extends to the spinal cord. Extend from the spinal cord. Next one, it contain thin membranes. It contain thin membranes. They formation of, it contain thin membranes. It contain thin membranes. It formation posterior choroid plexus. Formation of posterior choroid plexus. It formation of posterior choroid plexus. It formation of the posterior choroid plexus. So the medulla oblongata contain thin membranes. These thin membranes, they formation of posterior choroid plexus. Posterior choroid plexus. Next one, it contain cardiovascular and respiratory regulatory systems. Cardiovascular regulatory system and respiration control system is present. So the medulla oblongata contain a controlling of the cardiovascular system, controlling of the cardiovascular system and controlling of the respiratory system. So it contain, the medulla contain a regulation of cardiovascular system and respiratory system, cardiovascular system and respiratory systems. Next one, it contain vomiting center, vomiting center. Next one, hiccuping center, sneezing center, sneezing center, vomiting center, hiccuping center, sneezing center, coughing center, coughing center is present. So there it controlling of the sneezing, vomiting, hiccuping, coughing. So they are the centers present on the medulla oblongata, medulla oblongata. Once revised, so the medulla oblongata, so they are the posterior part of the brain. Next one, it contains a thin membranes. So these thin membranes, they formation of posterior choroid plexus, formation of posterior choroid plexus. It contains a centers, cardiovascular center. It contains a centers, so they are the cardiovascular regulatory center and respiratory regulatory center is presenting. Next one, it controlling the vomiting and controlling of the sneezing and controlling of the hiccuping and controlling of the coughing. So they are centers presenting on the medulla oblongata, medulla oblongata. Next one, so the midbrain, pons varolii, cerebellum and medulla. So these are also called as brain stem, brain stem, contain a brain stem, brain stem. So the brain stem means midbrain, midbrain, pons varolii and medulla. They formation of midbrain, they formation of the brain stem, they formation of brain stem. Next one, so the medulla oblongata continue to the spinal cord, medulla oblongata continue to the spinal cord. So the medulla oblongata opens out through the foramen magnum, open out through the foramen magnum, foramen magnum. So the spinal cord opens out through the foramen magnum. So they are continue to the spinal cord, continue to the spinal cord. So these are the hind brain. So they are the hind brain. Next one, brain ventricles. Next one, brain ventricles. Next one, brain ventricles. Next one, brain ventricles, brain ventricles. So the human brain contain a 4 ventricles. Human brain contain human brain contain 4 ventricles. Human brain contain a 4 ventricles. Human brain contain a 4 ventricles. Next one, first and second ventricle. Is called a lateral ventricle, lateral ventricle or paracil, is called as lateral ventricular paracil. So this first and second ventricle is also called as lateral ventricles or paracil, lateral ventricular paracil. So this first ventricle is presenting in right cerebral hemisphere, present in right cerebral hemisphere, right cerebral hemisphere. First ventricle, the first ventricle is presenting on the right cerebral hemisphere. First ventricle is presenting on the right cerebral hemisphere. Next one, second ventricle is present in second ventricle is present in left cerebral hemisphere, left cerebral hemisphere. Left cerebral hemisphere. So the human brain contains 4 ventricles. So first and second ventricle. So these are called as lateral ventricle or paracel. Lateral ventricle or paracel. So this first ventricle is presenting on the left cerebral hemisphere. First ventricle is presenting on the left cerebral hemisphere. First ventricle is presenting on the right cerebral hemisphere. Left ventricle is second ventricle is presenting on the left cerebral hemisphere. Next one, third ventricle. Next one, third ventricle. Is called third ventricle is called diocele. Third ventricle is also called as diocele. Third ventricle is called as diocele. It is presenting in the diencephalon. Diocele is present in diencephalon. Third ventricle is presenting in the diencephalon. Third ventricle is presenting on the diencephalon. See the diagram. So these are the first ventricle. First ventricle. So these are the second ventricle. Next one. So these are the third ventricle. Third ventricle. First ventricle, second ventricle and third ventricle. So these first and second ventricle presenting on the cerebral hemisphere. First presenting on the right cerebral hemisphere, second presenting on the left cerebral hemisphere, third presenting on the diencephalon. Third one is presenting on the diencephalon. Next one. So in this first, second ventricles connecting to the two narrow structures is called as connecting structures is called as foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro is called as foramen of Monro. These two connecting structures, first ventricle and second ventricle, these two ventricles connecting from the third ventricle. So these are called as foramen of Monro. Is called as foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. Next one, fourth ventricle is presenting on the next one, fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle is also called as myelocele. Is called as myelocele. Fourth ventricle is also called as a myelocele. Myelocele. Fourth, it is myelocele presenting in medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. So in this third ventricle, the third ventricle is connecting to the fourth ventricle. Third ventricle is connecting to the fourth ventricle. So these are the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle through the narrow canal. Narrow canal. So this narrow canal is called as iter. Is called as iter. Is called as iter. So these are the brain 4 ventricles. Brain 4 ventricles. So the brain contains 4 ventricles. Brain contains 4 ventricles. So the first ventricle, second ventricle. First ventricle is presenting on the right cerebral hemisphere. Second ventricle presenting on the left cerebral hemisphere. Left cerebral hemisphere. So the third ventricle is presenting on the diencephalon. Third ventricle is presenting on the diencephalon. Third ventricle presenting on the diencephalon. Fourth ventricle presenting on the medulla oblongata. Fourth ventricle presenting on the medulla oblongata. So in this diagram, so these are the ventricle. So they are the first They are the second. Next one, medulla the diencephalon. So the diencephalon they contain a third ventricle. So these first and second connecting, separate connections. So these are called as foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. So these are next one, fourth ventricle. So the fourth ventricle is presenting on the medulla oblongata. So this third ventricle and fourth ventricle connecting from the iter. Third and fourth is connecting from the iter. So they are the four ventricles of the human brain. Four ventricles of the human brain. So the first second ventricle is called as paracel. First second ventricles are called as paracel. So this third ventricle is called as diocele. Fourth ventricle is called as myocele. Myelocele. So the first second ventricle connecting from the third ventricle. So they are called as foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. Next one, the third ventricle connecting from the fourth ventricle is called as iter. So the myelocele is continued to the central canal of the spinal cord. Central canal of the spinal cord. This is continued to the spinal nerve. So the spinal nerve, the spinal cord. So the central canal of the spinal cord. Central canal of the spinal cord. So these are the ventricles of the brain. Next one, CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. Next one, cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid is filling with the ventricles of brain. It filled with ventricles of brain. Ventricles of brain, and is filling with the subarachnoid space, and filled with subarachnoid space. Subarachnoid space. So they are filled with the four ventricles filling with the fluid. That fluid is called as cerebrospinal fluid, and subarachnoid space filled with the fluid. These are called as cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. Next one, cerebrospinal fluid is a alkaline and colorless. Alkaline and colorless fluid. The CSF is a alkaline and colorless fluid. Next one, so it is the protection of the brain, and shock absorbing of the brain. Next one, the cerebrospinal fluid for day filtering from the 4 times only. The cerebrospinal fluid is filtering from the per day only 4 times. Per day filtering only 4 times. So in this filtering time, the excretion of metabolites and toxins. In the filtering time, the excretion of metabolites and toxins. So they are the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid filled with the ventricles of the brain and subarachnoid space of the brain membranes. So they are the alkaline and colorless fluid. So they are filtering from the 4 times per a day. So they are the elimination of metabolites and toxins. So these are the human brain. So the human brain contains 3 parts: forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. So the forebrain contains 3 parts: olfactory bulb, cerebellum and diencephalon. So the diencephalon contains 3 parts. One is the epithalamus, second one thalamus, third one hypothalamus. Midbrain there is no regions. Next one hindbrain. So the hindbrain contains 3 regions: cerebellum, pons varoli, medulla oblongata. Next one ventricles of the brain. Ventricles of the brain contain 4 ventricles. Next one cerebrospinal fluid. So these are the human brain. Next class we will discuss spinal cord. Next one spinal cord.